Phil Lindeman, Krystal 93 News Director, in the studio today with Shannon Galpin. She is a longtime local who has rode her mountain bike all across the world. Shannon, thank you for coming in to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, great to have you. And I understand you just got back from about a year and a half living on the road with your daughter. Where were you living while you were out traveling the world?
So we were homeschooling overseas for 16 months. And so we were everywhere. We were Namibia, Borneo, Indonesia, South America, Asia, and literally kind of world schooling and deep diving into a conservation project that we're doing together around youth activism and wildlife conservation. And now we're back home finally, and she's back in middle school. I'm so excited to unpack my one bag and unpack my storage unit and find new clothes.
And rediscover all the stuff that you left in the storage unit.
It's going to be like Christmas.
Well, of course, folks who have been around a long time will recognize your name, but for those who don't, Shannon, tell us your experience with world travel and also with working in Afghanistan. You were the first woman to mountain bike in Afghanistan, got the attention of National Geographic. How did all that come together? How did that all happen?
So almost exactly 10 years ago, I started traveling in Afghanistan to work on women's rights. And I did that through a small nonprofit I started called Mountain to Mountain. And I really focused on more traditional human rights and women's rights projects. I worked in women's prisons, and I worked to build a school for the deaf and an internet cafe, and all these projects that were around women's rights and empowering voice. But while I was there, I recognized that it was still one of the few countries in the world where women couldn't ride bikes. Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan are really kind of the last two strongholds of that. And I saw men and boys on bikes everywhere. And the longer that I was there, I recognized that as a foreign woman, I was allowed a lot of freedom, and the men treated me much like an honorary man.
And allowed to ride a bike.
And allowed to ride a bike. I had a motorcycle there. I started riding my bike in different places. And I used that as a way to explore the boundaries of what it was to be a female and what females could do. And also to explore the country, because it's insanely beautiful, very mountainous like it is here.
Yeah, I was going to say, and from what I understand, it's a lot like what we're familiar with here in the Rocky Mountains.
It is. It's kind of that stretch of the Hindu Kush where certainly anyone who mountaineers knows Pakistan is known for its mountains and K2, and that extends out into Afghanistan, and it's insanely beautiful, just incredibly dangerous, and security is an issue. And so the areas where it was safe and where I knew locals, and I built a relationship, I started exploring on my bicycle in between my projects on each visit, and just testing that boundary of, why can't women ride bikes? Women were running for parliament, women were running for president in elections, there were women that were part of a boxing club and football and volleyball and all these things that were, really progressing. But the bike was the last taboo. And it really paralleled back to the US and England a century earlier, where women who rode bikes were considered immoral and promiscuous.
Funny how those sorts of conceptions come from seemingly nowhere. But as you were working there in Afghanistan, how did things slowly, incrementally begin changing as you were working there?
So what I saw were all these women who now had, in the time period that I was there, access to the internet, access to Twitter because phones became smart, and that connection, along with post-Taliban era of education, meant that there was this very unique moment in time where they saw what was happening in the world that directly surrounded them. And so while myself riding a bike was still, I'm a foreign woman, that doesn't normalize it. It just kind of opens the question. It allowed me to ask direct questions. It allowed men who often said to me, wow, I just didn't think women were intelligent enough to ride a bicycle, for me to challenge that and to be able to show, no, it's okay, I can do this. And to meet people in very remote areas that I never would have met before on a very open, easy relationship where they don't interact with foreigners in that way. And over time, what happened is we were able to introduce the idea that perhaps it's not so controversial, that this could be an incredible social tool for access for midwives to be able to increase their range, because they don't have cars, they don't have buses in some of these mountain areas. You can build less schools if you can get girls on bikes. They can get to the nearby village without having to build 2 schools. You can only build 1. The bikes are an incredible vehicle for social justice, as well as the fact that they're empowering and they literally are freedom on 2 wheels. And over time, what happened was I met a Russian journalist who also rode his bike, which was much more normal. But he introduced me to a team in Afghanistan about 5 years into me working in Afghanistan.
And that team is the focus of the film that you'll be bringing to the Breckenridge Film Festival. Is this your first film premiere at the Breck Film Fest, at your hometown film festival?
This is my first premiere at the Breck Film Festival.
Very cool. Great to have you. And of course, you're going to be here for the Breck Film Fest.
Yeah, I wouldn't miss it for the world.
The rest of the team, though, you were saying, is going to be traveling around, because you guys have been screening this all over the place. It debuted in April at Toronto. What's the reception been like for this film yet? It's called Afghan Cycles.
We have been so pleased with the reception because it is a foreign language film. It's told in the voices of these young women who are the first generation of girls to ever dare to ride bicycles, who literally risk their lives to ride a bike. And we allowed them to tell their story. We don't have, it's not me speaking for them. And so to have a foreign language film set in Afghanistan, I think the bike is what drew a lot of people in. And we've had an incredible reception. Every film fest has been sold out. So every screening has been sold out. Brooklyn and Seattle both gave us awards for the film. We're screening in multiple festivals the weekend of Breck, which is why we had to divide and conquer. So I scored Hometown Film Festival, of course.
Yeah. I feel like that's more than fair that you should be able to come back and unpack your bags and get
right,
the film
double team it.
Yeah, film fest premiere at the same time. Afghan Cycles, tell us about the first meeting you had with this group that the Russian journalist introduced you to. What was that meeting like, and where were they?
So I was in Kabul, and Mikhail had told me that there was this men's cycling team and that they wanted to meet me and they wanted to go for a ride. So I immediately went to this little cafe where the captain of the team was a waiter. Mm-hmm. We met up. We agreed to go in a couple of days and meet at a gas station on the north edge of town in Kabul and go for a training ride. When I met them at the gas station, their coach drove up and there was a young woman with him, so I assumed it was like his assistant. She was, but she was also a member of the women's cycling team. And my jaw dropped. I'd been looking for women willing to ride bikes, families that would allow their girls to learn for 5 or 6 years at that point, all over the country. And here was this little tiny team of like 5 women in Kabul that were riding right underneath everyone's noses, in the hotbed of journalism and photojournalism and people trying to find a story. And here's this little hidden cycling team. And I immediately started working with them as my work. Mm-hmm. And then when I came back, wanted to tell their story.
Absolutely. Now, when you got the chance to ride with them, how long had they been riding themselves? Was it something that they've been doing for a long time as well, or is it just kind of they've been slowly getting into it?
The girls had not been riding for very long. They did not grow up riding bikes. 1 or 2 of them had learned to ride as kids, being refugees in Iran. Okay. So the mood was, a lot of women learn to ride. They can go ride in the parks. So they had learned to ride and then had never had the opportunity. Most of them, this was their first time. The coach was literally teaching them to ride in their late teens, how to ride a bike. And they were not highly skilled cyclists. They were the members of the national cycling team that did not know how to shift their gears.
But the first ever national cycling team, for them, I'm sure that was almost more important than...
Yeah,
riding the bikes.
It was huge. It was huge. And so what I looked at and why I immediately jumped in was, here is a way to use the sport of cycling to normalize bikes for girls. If we could build and support the national cycling team and essentially rally national pride around sport, which is huge in Afghanistan around football and cricket, then that could normalize getting girls on bikes in remote areas for transportation education, for school, just, the normalcy that you see all over the rest of the world, and take away that taboo that girls riding bikes are immoral and promiscuous.
Yeah, the I guess the glitz and glamour of sport could be the intro to something that's much bigger and much greater and better for everybody in the end.
Definitely. Sports has a unique way of seeing that. We see that with the Olympics all the time. It breaks barriers. It certainly rallies national pride around, our sporting heroes. And over time, we saw that happen.
Very cool. Now, when you got a chance to finally head back with the crew and turn this into, like a documentary project, how far had that team come?
Not very far, because we were able to rally this really fast. I came back from meeting the team, and a couple of months later, the director, Sarah Menzies, came to town with another friend, Anna Bronis, who's our impact producer on the film. They were coming through town, and we stopped and had coffee and lunch at Park and Main, and we were just talking about the last visit and what everybody was up to, and Sarah was kind of in between projects, and I just looked at her and I was like, this would be an amazing story. You know that, right? Like, this is girls on bikes in Afghanistan, and taboos being broken, and literally a revolutionary story told on two wheels. This in real time. It's like reality TV unfolding, which is scary at the same time because you don't know what's going to happen. But she had made a film about my work in Afghanistan, so she was familiar about what the situation was, and had said if there was ever an opportunity to tell another story in Afghanistan, I would love to go there. So literally over coffee at Park and Main, we kind of shook hands and were like, let's do this. We rallied an all-female film crew, and about 4 months later, we were back in Kabul with a crew, which then I was essentially in charge of keeping this group of women safe, acting as field producer, arranging, not just me, but now a team of 5 women.
Very cool. And that was about 5 years ago, almost exactly.
It was.
So right about now.
Yep.
Very cool. And as you guys were filming this team, and as you guys were going through this story, what did you discover that you didn't expect, or what sort of things were happening that you didn't even predict might have happened?
Well, this was supposed to be a short film done in one, and we should have been back after that trip and produced this film. And literally it would have been out in 2013, 2014. And instead it took 5 years of production, because after that first trip, everybody comes back from the film production. I do my normal sort of, go back in a few months later and continue to work with the girls. As I'm there, another Afghan girl has started a bike club, completely unknown to the national team. She just wants to start a bike club and does on her own. At the same time, I find out that there's a girl in another province that is starting to teach girls to ride bikes. None of them know about each other.
Yeah, already. Very cool.
And so we're literally watching this revolution unfold unbeknownst to each other. And I told Sarah, like, this is happening. And she's like, all right, we got to come back and continue the story. And then we said that about 3 more times. And we just kept following the story. And then as the story unfolded, the security in Afghanistan continued to decline. I continued to support the team, which meant they received National Geographic Adventures of the Year a couple years after I had become one. We got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. They had, tons of accolades around the world in terms of press, media, 2 exhibitions in human rights museums. And so here's this team that hasn't ever really won anything, but what they're doing is breaking barriers on 2 wheels. They're showing the world and inspiring the world that young girls can change the world and change their country and change themselves on a bike. And that parallel, I think, with our suffragette movement a century later from the U.S. and Britain was overlapping, and people saw that.
Very cool. And as these things were growing, like you said, it was a matter of months that you started hearing about these other little pockets of girls who were getting on bikes and getting out and making their own clubs. These days, what is the climate like there? Are these bike clubs still doing well? Are they still thriving?
So over the 5 years, again, the security deteriorating, the bike clubs continued to pop up, drop, pop up, drop, kind of reform in different ways. With new members, there was another one that formed as boys and girls together, which was really exciting. And the team in Bamiyan is thriving. The national team collapsed under corruption. The entire federation collapsed under corruption and scandal with the Afghan Olympic Committee, and is now in a process of rebuilding and reforming. At the same time, we had this refugee crisis. As we saw the refugee trail going through Europe, that wasn't just Syria and Iraq, it was also Afghanistan. Because of the security situation becoming so much worse, ISIS starting to come into Afghanistan, many young people tried to leave, families trying to get asylum. And so that meant that several of our cyclists are actually living in Europe now.
Okay, so the events and all those other things kind of got in the way of what's happening. But from what you've seen, there are still people committed to biking. These girls are still committed to doing what it takes. And as far as the general sense of biking and, whether or not women belong on bikes, have you seen that start to change? Is that starting to shift in Afghanistan too, or is there still pushback? There's
definitely still pushback because these things take time. It's something that controversial when you have a country that has 2/3, half of it right now is probably controlled by the Taliban. You're going to have pushback, but you also see this incredible push through the youth activists and through this next generation, where young people believe that things are different than the generation before them, and many of these young women, they're doing this because they have the support of their father or their brothers or their uncles to do what they're doing. So it's not just that all men are against this or, the older generation is against this. And so while there was the collapse of the team and now there's this kind of rebuilding, at the same time, you have more women on bikes than there's ever been. A country that has never seen a woman ride a bike now has had hundreds of girls ride bikes. Yeah.
And that's incredible that sort of change can happen, in just the past decade, even 15 years. Final question was about the film itself. So if folks hopefully get a chance to come out and see it, but if they don't, what are some of the moments or maybe even characters, some of the girls that stick out in your mind to you from this particular film?
One of the key characters that we ended up following throughout, Frozan, kind of leads our story. She opens it and she closes the film because we really kind of made this film. After 5 years of production, it could have gone in so many directions. We had so much footage, and really we chose to focus this as a coming of age story because we watched these girls grow up and become young women, and Frozan really leads our story. And I have had the pleasure to bike with her and watch her develop not only as a cyclist but as a young woman. And I remember going for a bike ride with them in Kabul, and we were all meeting from different parts of town at this one place to then go ride. And she's riding very slowly down the street, and there's this woman running beside her, and it's her mother. And her mother is, in her headscarf, in plastic sandals, running beside her. It's 6 a.m. because we'd always leave super early. And she had grown up always wanting to be able to ride a bicycle, and so she was out there just to see the team, just to kind of cheer them off on their training ride. So we put her in the back of Coach's car. And
cool, she got to come along.
Yeah, so she was in the sag wagon.
Very cool, very cool. That's I'm sure one of many of the touching stories in there. And this follows five girls part of the team or more?
It follows more. We actually follow several of one of the bike clubs, the 2 main teams, and it really touches on the beauty of Afghanistan. You see the landscape, you see the danger and what these girls go through, but also really the indomitable spirit that they have, that change is possible. And so you really do learn the power and the resiliency of these young women and their ability to tell their own story, that they're not victims. They are really the change makers of their country.
And as you were saying, it seems like this youngest generation, the generation they're part of, feels like things aren't changing or making their way to change, that they've changed, that they're already on the way to better things.
Yeah, and it really shows that anyone who's going to come out, all of us ride bikes up here in the high country. Anyone who loves a bike should come see the film. It really illustrates the power of what a bike is, much more than just our mode of sport and transportation, but that literally bikes are a vehicle for change.
Yeah, and it's pretty incredible to see that, across the world happening right now. Final question for you was producer. Is this your first time as a producer on a film?
This is officially my first time as a producer on a film.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a field producer for another documentary in Afghanistan. This is the first time that I've been a full producer all the way through, so it was a big learning experience for me.
Any regrets from being producer on this, or things that you wish you would have known before you had become producer?
So many. We could do a whole nother show on that.
I'm sure. Well, but either way, good experience. You enjoyed doing what you were doing this time around?
Yeah. I mean, all of my work has been about empowering voice. And so to be able to do that through the medium of being behind the scenes on a film and being able to bring this story to life and work with an incredible crew of women on something that I've dedicated my life to, working in Afghanistan, this has been incredible to work with such a great group of women and to learn so much about how a film comes together.
Great. And now Afghan Cycles will be making its Breckenridge Film Fest premiere right here in your hometown.
It will be. I'm excited to bring this to my hometown.
Great. And tell us, when will it be showing, and what can people expect as far as you being there? Will you be doing any sort of...
Yeah, actually I have a few things that I'm doing. So the film itself is screening, it's at the Saturday screening at CMC at 10 a.m. I'll be introducing the film, and then I'll be doing a Q&A after, so people can come and ask questions and learn a little bit more behind the scenes stuff around the film. And then I'm also emceeing the Adventure Night on Friday for the adventure film with Andy Irons, which will be a lot of fun. And I believe there's a women's panel discussion on Friday that people can come to, and it's all women in film, which should be really interesting, looking at women in filmmaking from a lot of different perspectives.
Great. So more than a few places to catch you, Shannon, while you're back in town.
Definitely. People can grab me, ask me questions anytime they want.
Fantastic. Shannon, thank you again for coming in. Looking forward to that local premiere of Afghan Cycles and seeing where it goes from here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back.
Absolutely. Shannon Galpin on Krystal 93.